So now we are in the praxis section of the book, and that's what it's talking about, the importance of practicing and doing things your own way, or like modifying what he's taught you so far. Then he goes into centering. And this is where I kind of have an issue. I would have put this in the beginning, or at least before the Book of Qualities, because it's, first of all, it's not even that long. So it's not like you're putting like all of like 50, or maybe it is like 50 pages. It's not like you're putting like 100+ pages before you even get to the Book of Qualities anyway, so you might as well put it in the front. But if you're going to start talking about centering and how people should do centering, I think that's something you should learn before you start doing the practices in the Book of Qualities. That's just what I think. Another thing about centering, he's not talking about grounding, he's only talking about centering. And I know that these things can be, sometimes confused with one another, and some people think they're one and the same, and some people do both, but they just call it the one thing, and whatever, like, you do what works for you. But when he's talking about centering, it sounds like he's talking about grounding, because he's using the roots technique. So to me, the roots technique is used to ground, and that's because in my mind, the visualization that I'm imprinting is putting roots into the ground. Therefore, I'm grounding. Also, when you think about what do you do to ground, a lot of people walk barefoot in the dirt on the ground. So I'm not saying it doesn't center you. I'm just saying it sounds more like grounding. For me, the grounding happens first, and then the centering happens. Because for me, grounding is so that I don't feel like I'm going to get lost in my mind or in the ether, whatever you want to call it. And then the centering is to begin that concentration of energy so that I could fuel what I'm about to do. And then that goes in reverse as I'm going to close. But that was a little confusing to me, because I was like, wait, he sounds like he's grounding to me, but he's saying it's centering. And like I said, to some people, they're the same thing. To some people, they're probably the opposite of the way that I explained it. And there's nothing wrong with that. I just wanted to share the way that I saw it, because this is one of those things when it comes to reading other practitioners' methods. Like, it doesn't mean that they're right or they're wrong, or that you're right or that you're wrong. It just means that that works for them, and what you do works for you. And if what you're doing doesn't work for you, then maybe try it the way that they're doing and compare notes. Another thing I like about Aiden is that he does try to give people alternatives if they can't perform some of the exercises due to physical limitations. One example being that centering exercise, he asks you to stand. And then he writes a footnote at the bottom addressing people who may not be able to stand, and then tells them how they can visualize what he just asked somebody who can stand to visualize. And he also does it a couple of other times throughout the book. So I did want to give him credit for that and give him, kind of like a little golden star, because I know not a lot of books do that. Also, I wanted to take this time to mention that I think I have been saying this man's last name completely wrong every single time for like the past couple of videos. I think it's Aiden Watcher, not Watcher. And you think that the CHT would clue me into that, but it did not. And my brain was like, path of least resistance, it's Watcher. But I think it's not. And I think you just need to go to his website and really like figure it out. But yeah. Okay, this is under the new moon section. And he is talking about how many times he likes to say certain charms. And then he's talking about how you should feel a shift as an indicator to how many times you may want to speak a charm, like whether it's once, 3 times, 6 times, 9, blah, 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 blah. You should feel a shift. And then he says, it may arrive if notable, like a blurring of vision, a subtle vibration, a touch of goosebumps, a change in how things sound in the room, on up to full-on visual distortions. It's good to know that it could be very quiet. Real power is often quite subtle. And I highlighted that. Real power is often quite subtle, because this is part of something that I spoke on, I think, at the very beginning. I think maybe it was even the first vlog of reading this book, where I spoke about how I feel that magic, that power is very subtle. It's almost like a whisper sometimes. And if you don't know how to listen, you will miss it. So him saying that was just kind of like verifying my UPG, which is unverified personal gnosis. But if he's verifying it, then now it's starting to, like, on the meter of unverified to verified, shifting a little this way. So that's kind of cool. And I just wanted to kind of like document that, because I think a lot of us talk about our UPG, but when does it transition into being unverified to a little less unverified to where it's kind of verified-ish, kind of like the correspondences of certain plants and why their properties are seen as healing or any other type of property. It's because it went from UPG to somewhere in the middle, getting closer to the verified part. Okay, the next part is called the four roads. And right here he's talking about directions, but also talking about the elements, and then moves into talking about elementals. And he already told us how to cast a circle / create a sphere. And then here he's talking about calling in the quarters, or calling in the directions, or calling in the elementals prior to starting specific workings. I like the way that he explained it, because my experience working with elementals is more that through dragon magic. So it's different than what he explains it, but it's still a horse, just of a different color. That's probably the best way to explain it. But it's a great way to give, he's just giving so much information in one book. And yes, he references like his other books every now and then, which is kind of like shameless plug, but also really good, because instead of repeating what he already wrote, he just tells you where he pulled from or wrote more of. And I think that's just what you do as somebody who knows how to write papers, whether they be scientific, literary, whatever, but like more of like nonfiction stuff. It's just smart to reference your own work. Okay, so the book is done. We are done with that book. And I am so happy. I had a really good experience reading it. There were times where I was reading through it on a daily, other times where I would read 3 pages and put it down for like days on end because, you know, life happens or whatever. But from the last part we left off, he then continues to talk about spells and charms, talismans. Then he gives examples of each of these. Like I said at the beginning of this video, I do feel like this information would have been better in the beginning of the book, because it just would be. That's just how I feel. But the last few things I wanted to share was on page 220, titled Minimalist Approaches, a Prison Appendix. So he's writing this so it's accessible for people that are in prison, but also for people that might have limited resources or space or supplies. And I highlighted this. The inner work behind the physical forms is more than enough in many situations. The only rule: never concern yourself about the things you cannot access. You have what you need in your own body, mind, and spirit. Instead, focus on what you can do. If you cannot burn candles, don't worry about it. Work with what you have. And then he has a list of minimalist approaches. I just wanted to touch on that because I believe that is true. And the supplies you use is based on your correspondences and your belief system. So if you're using a lot or a little bit, it's because that has either already worked for you or that's what you feel will work for you. And that's why comparison, specifically when you're like a beginner, that's why comparison really, really robs you of your magic. Because if you're, let's just say, a minimalist person, I'm not, but if you are and you see these people using tons of ingredients or extravagant ingredients or these objects that are just not feasible for your situation, area, wherever you're living at, or just time in your life, you may feel othered in not a good way. And that's kind of really preventing you from moving forward in your practice when you can just do everything in here. And I know a lot of people probably already know that, but it's something that kept me from doing things. A lot of things kept me from doing things. I think I'm going to make a video on that alone, but yeah, just a cute little note there. And then the very last like chapter, I guess, is his closing thoughts about magic. And that's just a couple of pages long. And then that's the last page. And then I highlighted this. And I even took a picture of it and put it on my Instagram story because I just really liked it. But he says, we can use our magic to change the roads we are on and to help us walk better ones. This is the work of the changeling, the work of the witch as I know it. I just wanted to share that because I just love how he tied back in the title of the book. And I don't know what came first, the title or the book. But either way, I just like how it feels complete. There was a couple of things that I think I shared throughout like this whole journey that I'm like, that's not for me or whatever. And that's totally fine. And I don't do it to ever try to bash on an author. So if I have like truly like bad critiques, I try to not share those because those are my personal opinions. And I think everybody needs to find out what they don't like on their own. But if there's something I disagree with because I do it differently, I'm probably going to share that just to try to show other people how it's okay to do things differently and how it can work both ways for different people. And it can even work both ways for you. Like if you try like first their way and then their way and their whatever. But more than anything, the reason for practicing is to learn to trust yourself and your own magic so you can find what works for you based on your own like custom witchiness, magic, essence, enchantments, charms, whatever. I don't even know where I'm going with this anymore. All I know is that I'm done with the book and I'm so happy. I want to thank everybody who watched every single one of these vlogs watching me read this book. I know that it's not one of the most popular things, but I really don't care. This is not one of those channels. This is Jazmine's gonna do what she needs to do to keep her journey where it needs to be channels. And my only purpose is to be consistent and to inspire others to express themselves. Not to copy other people and their expression, but to express themselves by watching other people be themselves. I see a lot of people trying to be too perfect or too clean or too neat or too aesthetic, and that being what keeps other people from pursuing these other types of media creative projects. And that breaks my heart, especially when I know there's literal geniuses out there who aren't posting things just because they don't think their shit is perfect enough. And that's fucking trash. And I know you know that, but I'm just reminding you.